Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Happy Cynics. I'm Kevin Twain Lowry, otherwise known as Dr. K. And with me is my co-host, Isaac, the all-seeing eye dog, Dillman.
Howdy, howdy.
Yeah. So today, we're going to delve into liberation theology. We talked about the changes in Catholicism. And it's interesting, too, because I just saw an article today, Isaac, about how there's a fresh wave of younger, more conservative priests that are stepping up and taking more of a role in the Catholic Church. And I was reading people's comments. This was in the New York Times. And a lot of people were saying, and there were a couple people that said that they were educators in Catholic parochial schools, and said, this is exactly what the church doesn't need, because this is what's turning young people off and turning them away. But anyway, liberation theology was controversial to a certain extent, at least in America it was. But you how do you want to set this up or start? Where's a good starting point, Isaac?
Yeah, well, I mean, this sort of came up because it's a contrast with some of the other trends in Christianity that we've been talking about. And I think that this is a unique, branch of Christianity. And I think it is separate because it runs so counter to the rest of the culture.
Yeah, that's right.
That it deserves some attention. And I think there's also some interesting tidbits on the exact environment that sort of gave birth to liberation theology and what makes that possible.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about the context in which the liberation theology arose.
Yeah, so you can't separate liberation theology from Latin America and South America.
Right.
That's where it comes from, and you can't really talk about the historical context of South America and Latin America without talking about the phenomena known as banana republics, where companies such as the United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita, would basically lobby the U.S. government to establish authoritarian dictatorships in the Latin American, South American world in order for them to be able to control the economies of these fruit-producing countries for their own benefit. So the example that always comes to my mind is the establishment of Pinochet in Chile.
Right.
And then also the Salvadoran Civil War in the 80s. That was all basically American foreign policy at work.
Right. So, basically, going back, starting with the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors, with the colonization of North America, and that, the Native American exploitation and conflict with Native Americans is another issue. Oh, by the way, my wife and I went to see that first installment of the Kevin Costner 4-part Western.
Oh, the Western?
Yeah, Horizon.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty good. I can see where it's going to go. It was kind of disjointed at the beginning but Horizon is this kind of frontier town where all these different people are going to converge. And really what it centers on, and I'll get back to our topic here. I'm in the bushes here a second. But it basically is a frontier town where somebody was fraudulently selling land tracts to people, telling them they could have, all this great farmland and that, but it was not a part of the territory that had been negotiated between the U.S. government and the Apaches. And so these people settled off of this river in Apache territory not realizing that they basically fraudulently sold this land. And then the Apache kept repeatedly leveling and massacring the people that tried to settle there. And and it even caused a rift in the Apaches between a chief and his son. The chief wanted to just seek peace with the white people. The son wanted to go down fighting. And so it's kind of it's interesting, the way he set it up. So we'll see how it goes. The next part's coming out another month and a half or so. But yeah, it was 3 hours long, just the first part of 4. So anyway.
That's pretty long. And so one of my favorite movies is a Kevin Costner Western.
Oh, yeah?
Dances with Wolves.
Oh, yes, yes.
So is this, would I be better served just to go watch Dances with Wolves?
I don't know. I never watched Dances with Wolves.
Oh, really?
No, that was one I missed.
It's a very similar premise
to
what you just described. It's about a U.S. Civil War, officer.
Yes.
On the Union side.
Right.
And he's post-war, he's sent out to man this post out in the middle of the frontier. And it's just a one-man post, so he's all by himself.
Wow.
And when he gets there, all of the natives have massacred whoever was there before him.
Right.
And it's about him establishing a friendship with the natives.
Yes.
And eventually becoming disgruntled with the Army's treatment of the Native Americans. It's a very, very good movie.
Yeah, this one has it. That's one of the plot lines. There are multiple plot lines in this because he's pulling in different kinds of characters. But nevertheless, exploitation. So now I'll get back out of the bushes, back to where we were going. Even the American colonies fought for independence because they believed they were being exploited by the crown. But then they also joined in the same exploitation. But Central and South America, Africa too, if you want to talk about the slave trade. Again, another issue. But here again, Central South America, all this exploitation. And this is what gives rise eventually to this new kind of theology. Now, the one thing I will say here to kind of chime in as we go, one of the things that Gutierrez makes a point of in talking about liberation theology is the fact that there were already political theologies out of Europe, but he is saying that doesn't fit Latin America. So what was the European whole thing? It was a way of reconciling Christianity with the concept of rights. Natural God-given rights. Now, because here's the thing, this may not be apparent to just the casual observer, but if you think about it, Christianity arose out of Judaism, and Judaism was a very patriarchal, hierarchical culture as well. Now, Christianity was somewhat, I personally think, there was a fair amount of Christianity that was, say, more libertarian in the sense of talking about the equality of all people. So you have these contrasting views even amongst Paul's letters, and that's why St. Paul's letters, some of them are disputed today, whether they were actually written by him. And some of that, there's other reasons like the writing style and vocabulary and other things. But in some places, Paul says, in Christ, there's neither slave nor free, Jew, Gentile, male, female. Everybody's equal in God's eyes. On other places, you have supposedly Paul saying, no, man was created first and then the woman, and the woman was the first in the transgression, not the man. And so therefore women need to be subject to men. And I don't allow women to have authority over men. So you have this tension even within the New Testament texts that were canonized. So even though early Christianity started out more egalitarian, whenever it finally became centralized under the Roman Empire, it very quickly became patriarchal again. So what am I saying? Why am I saying all this? Because once the Reformation took place and we started to, and that broke the political power of the Catholic Church, then Christian thinkers wanted to have a basis for what is the basis for, say, people just having their own government, especially in light of the fact that the Protestant reformers actually went back to a more conservative theology that says, oh, the world's completely corrupt. You can't trust your natural conscience and your natural reason. That kind of thinking lends itself back to, well, you can't trust your own judgment, so you might as well submit to the hierarchy of the church. At the same time, the Protestants were saying, but the church isn't inerrant. The church makes mistakes. Everybody has the freedom or has to answer and responsibility to answer to God directly. So there's these kind of two antithetical strains going on in Reformation era Christianity. So when you had then more secular thinkers, they were Christian, but let's put it this way, secular in the sense that they weren't going to reconcile everything by the Bible. Say people like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, they certainly believed in God, a creator, etc. But the idea of somehow you got to look it up and reconcile it in the Bible, to have a basis for it, no. So they started talking about the concept of natural rights. Our creator must have given us natural rights. So European American political theology has always been about God created us in his image, so we have the right to be self-governing. Even like John Wesley talked about the image of God, one aspect of that he called the political image. So where God put Adam in charge of all the animals, see, God has given responsibility to humans to govern, and that's to all human beings. So this was the way Europeans and Americans, let's just say Westerners in general, Northwesterners, justified being Christian, but still no longer having to answer to a king or queen or the hierarchy of the church.
Right.
Okay, Gutierrez is saying, that's great for you, but we're in a different situation. We don't even have basic rights. You're at least living in a culture that has already accepted that everybody has certain rights. So how does Christian political theology function in the Northwest? It really has to do with the government should be protecting everybody's individual rights. Gutierrez says we're not there. We're back like in a medieval feudalistic type state where people don't have basic rights. They don't have basic freedoms. And so we need a different type of political theology.
Yeah, well, and there's also that at least the Western global South at the time was almost entirely Catholic. And I think that plays a pretty big role in the establishment of liberation theology as well, because when everyone that you know in an entire country is of one faith.
Yes.
And that faith talks about the defining characteristics of it being like a family and brotherhood and, all of these sort of egalitarian terms that the New Testament authors use to talk about life in the church. These theologians are looking at their society and wondering, okay, well, if we're all Catholics, if we're all Christians, why are we treating each other like this?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think that realization obviously should be universal. It shouldn't just have to be within your own faith group. but it's easier to take a stand on something like that when you have an established power structure that is universal in society that is not the state.
Right.
So one of the things that Kavanaugh talks about in his book, I'm drawing a blank on it, Torture and the Eucharist. He talks about how excommunication plays this like social role in these countries that birth liberation theology.
Right.
Because everyone's Catholic, so to be excommunicated is like kind of a big deal for a politician or know, somebody who's participating in these authoritarian regimes that pop up in South and Central America.
Right.
So like for the Catholic Church to excommunicate the dictator of the country, that's a big deal. Whereas in America, if the Catholic Church excommunicated the president, well, who really cares other than Catholics? So the universality of Catholicism, I think, is sort of the other side of the fertile ground for liberation theology to come up.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I don't know if this is exactly the way. I don't think this is probably exactly the way that Gutierrez was seeing it, but I don't think he would disagree with what I'm saying here. I think, let's put it this way, the criticism of, say, the European political theology, I'll just say European for convenience sake, European political theology, that is kind of what I would say would be post-revolutionary theology.
Yes.
Okay, and that's kind of what Gutierrez, I believe, has in mind. We are in need of revolution. The Europeans and the European colonies, etc., went ahead with revolution without worrying about reconciling it theologically. But now, how do we call people to a revolution and justify that, especially within again, Gutierrez doesn't have any desire to leave Catholicism and become a Protestant.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the question is, do you have to leave Catholicism to be able to stand up for your own rights?
Right.
And have a revolution? Or is there room within Catholicism to justify people standing up in behalf of themselves?
Yeah. So maybe now would be a good time to get into like the content of what liberation theology is.
Yes.
Because we've mentioned Gutierrez multiple times. He's the father of liberation theology.
Yes.
For those of you who have not read A Theology of Liberation, which is the book on that sort of spawned this whole movement.
In the early 60s. Yes.
Yeah. What was it? The 60s?
I believe so.
Or the 50s? It was that era.
Yeah, it was late 50s, early 60s.
The big question for me would be whether it predated the Cuban Revolution under Castro.
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Or if it's a reflection on those types of revolutions that are already going on. Because I know it's it basically comes out of a council called by the regional archbishop in what's that city in Colombia? Medellin. It comes out of Medellin, Colombia. There's a council that happens there that's in response to the political situation of South America.
Right.
And that's what this book is sort of about.
Yes.
But the argument that Gutierrez makes is that if you can trace throughout both the Old Testament and New Testament scriptures and the Christian historical tradition, this theme of liberation. So it first occurs in the exodus of the Jews from Egyptian slavery. And then there are other examples he cites throughout there. And then it occurs again in a primary example would be like Jesus liberating humanity from guilt.
Yes. Yeah, there's certain... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, it's contextualized by Gutierrez for his context in saying that like it's not just liberation internally from sin. It's not just liberation in the sense of like a Lutheran sort of interpretation of that.
Yes.
It's an entire societal transformation, and it's the transformation of society on behalf of a particular group of people in society that, if you read the Bible through this liberation lens, is the poor every time. So he makes the argument that God takes a preferential option for the poor over the rich.
Right.
And that's a key phrase for liberation theology, that preferential option for the poor.
Yes.
So if you are rich and you want Jesus to be on your side, what you should do is take up the side of the poor, become one of the poor, live in solidarity with the poor, because that's who Jesus hung out with. And that's sort of like a very short bullet points version of liberation theology.
Yes, exactly. I'm double checking here. Let's see, 50th anniversary. No, that'd be 1973. Theology of Liberation. Oh, I thought that I think you're right. I think his first foray into it was, it may have been the late 50s, because it was leading up into, Medellin, I'm probably mispronouncing. You already pronounced it probably correctly. The 68 Conference on Justice. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So it is later than I thought, because it's published 1973.
Yeah, 1971.
But it is born out of the Medellin
first edition. Well, yeah, I was thinking, I guess maybe it was post-Vatican II then.
Yeah, well, that was important that it is also addressing Vatican II.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, he's still alive, I believe, 97 years old. So
wow,
he's hanging in there. Well, okay, so let me say this. In the United States, there was a forerunner to liberation theology, which is known as the social gospel.
Right.
Championed by Rauschenbusch. But the difference here is Rauschenbusch was just calling for, basically Rauschenbusch says that the kingdom of God is not just spiritual, but it's also physical. Jesus did more than just walk around preaching to people. He actually helped people. He met people's needs. He healed people. He changed things. He worked against the social order. And basically, Rauschenbusch's argument, and this was the right around the turn of the 20th century, Rauschenbusch says that sin resides in political structures or social structures, because the system, for example, somebody grew up in the American South would say, oh yeah, everybody knows that black and white people should have separate bathrooms. Okay. Because that was the norm. Like the social structure sets the norm, and then people accept that as being okay. And somebody has to speak up and say, no, that's not okay. There needs to be a new norm. You need to change the structures. But what Gutierrez is saying, we need more than that. We don't need reform. We actually need revolution. We need to overthrow these governments and change society so that our people, can have basic rights and freedoms, that everybody else is enjoying. We need to get out from underneath and even whenever it's not political exploitation, there's economic exploitation.
Yeah. Well, so that's sort of one of the unique contributions of Gutierrez, is that he addresses, when it comes to the point that our brothers and sisters in Christianity are starving, it justifies a total overthrow of the system.
Yes. And the thing is, of all the political philosophers, there was really only one noteworthy one who called for a complete overthrow, and that was Marx.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the first Christian Marxist movement.
Yes, it is. Although there were people that accused some of Reinhold Niebuhr's writings to be a little too Marxist, but it wasn't overtly Marxist. Gutierrez is, he's pretty much advocating that it's okay for this to happen the way that it happened. I'm not sure that he's necessarily, let's say, giving an affirmation of the communist revolution in Cuba, but there was a sense where this is justifiable because the conditions are so bad for so many people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See, the Europeans, white Europeans, just went right into democracy and capitalism without really worrying about whether those things really did jibe with Christianity or not. We just went on. And that's what is kind of laughable about all these people like, oh, yeah, American Christian nation, and, city on the hill and all, all these folks just went about this without even worrying about whether does capitalism even go with what Jesus taught about money, for example. I'm not saying it doesn't or can't be reconciled, but here's the point. Is it really fair? Okay, if we're going to say what we did was justified, well then what's our basis for condemning somebody else calling for a revolution in their part of the world? Like, in other words, they're not doing anything any differently than what we did in our history. And that is, you just step up and do what needs to be done, and you worry about reconciling it religiously later. I mean, Gutierrez is at least trying to make that reconciliation. And maybe the thing is, he's afraid that if there's not this reconciliation, see, that's what's not really clear to me. I wonder, was he really trying to motivate the populace to revolt? Or was he trying to, and I know he was also trying to influence the Catholic Church.
Well, so his relationship with the Vatican is quite interesting.
Yes.
Right, because initially the Vatican is very upset.
Yes, right.
About liberation theology, and not just the publication of this book, but the council at Medellin. Right. They are strongly against what that council concludes.
Yes.
However, it's so popular in the global South that they really can't. They would lose half of the globe.
Yes.
If they excommunicated Gutierrez. So they're stuck.
Yes.
It's kind of a genius move on the part of Gutierrez and the other bishops of South America to publish when they did.
Yes. Yes. I really do. I suspect that what he's really after is he wants to motivate the populace. He wants them to feel justified in standing up for themselves, that they can still say we're good Christians and we're good Catholics. Okay.
Yeah,
but we can organize
Catholicizes the rich.
Yes, exactly. And I think at the same time, what he's wanting from the church is, let us do our thing. Don't step in and try to squelch this because you want to maintain, like, the Catholic Church had become too embedded. Here's the thing. Once the Catholic Church lost its political power throughout the world, and even like with the, there was a certain concession to this even in the Vatican I Council. There is more concession to this in the Vatican II Council. But the Catholic Church's influence was, like, the Catholic Church's approach starting in the 19th century was, okay, we're going to give up trying to retake the political power. Instead, we'll get in good with the political powers and try to serve as kind of an advisor. Well, they their inroad now was to all these corrupt government heads and corrupt governments that were being run throughout Latin America and South America.
Yeah, and again, these are essentially puppet states for the United States at this point.
Yes, yes.
So it's bad faith actors all around.
Yes, yes. So I think that's what Gutierrez wants from the church, is that support of the people. In other words, here, the people are going to be turning against the current government structure. Don't let your allegiance or your relationship with the current government keep you from defending or standing up for the people or speaking out in their behalf. And I think that's part of the theological appeal of it.
Yeah, well, and there's also, I think part of it is also an outcome of World War II and the influence of the publication of Bonhoeffer's writings.
Yes,
because Gutierrez, while he is like very tied to the global South in context, he's educated in Europe, I believe.
Yes.
Let me check that.
I think that's right, but go ahead.
He currently holds the John Cardinal O'Hara Professorship of Theology at the University of Notre Dame.
Yeah. I told you they hired him a couple of years after I got my PhD. So
yeah, so he's educated in France.
That's what I was thinking, Louvain or something like that, or
Lyon.
Lyon. Okay.
Oh no, it's the theology faculty of Louvain. Yeah,
I was right. Okay.
Yeah,
I thought I remember reading that somewhere, but anyway.
So he's aware of the influence of sort of these broader global trends, and one of the things that influences him is Bonhoeffer's writings about overthrowing Hitler and justifying that with his own Christian faith.
Yes. Well, I think the French also, because of the French Revolution, the French Catholics, well, and that's another issue. The French Catholics were always kind of polarized from the Italians anyway for control of the church. And I've mentioned that a couple. There was that, you know, or there's anti-popes and things like that. But I think the French are more open to talk of outright revolution. So anyway, so, you know, how do you reconcile a revolution with, you know, honor the king, because God puts the king there that's part of God's governance of the world and all that sort of thing. And, so that's always been a divisive issue. And I always found it interesting that, say, even like, people like John Wesley did not support the American Revolution and felt that they should just be faithful to the crown. I don't know. So anyway, so the Marxist, let's tease out just for a little bit the Marxist side of this.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's kind of, for the audience, what is it about Marxism and what is it that's really upsetting to people that they feel that this isn't really Christian?
About liberation theology?
Yeah. Like why should Marxism not be, why is Marxism viewed inherently as anti-Christian?
So I have a very cynical view of this particular issue, which I'll share because, you know, we're the Happy Cynics here.
Yes.
That
you be cynical, I'll be happy. Okay.
You were talking earlier about the American Revolution and how we sort of were a Christian nation, but we moved right into capitalism immediately without ever having a theological conversation about it.
Right.
And I think the reason for that is that governing the country was largely done by a group of deists, you know, at the founding of the nation. And there's this sort of phenomenon like in the Roman Empire, you had the Roman pantheon of gods and, the emperor are sort of part of that. But if you look at how the the Roman senators and the emperor are acting, they don't believe any of it. Right. This is a tool that is being used to control people.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, go worship the emperor and then you can participate in the economy.
Right.
This is not something that is like genuinely believed by the upper echelon of Roman culture.
Yes.
I think that a similar situation happens in America with Christianity, that the upper echelon, the elite government of America and the Western world sometimes, especially on the right, uses religion as a means of control.
Yes.
And such movements as Marxism or liberation theology are directly contrary to that. And so when the fear is that knowledge that Christianity can be revolutionary and against global powers, the fear is that knowledge will spread to the normal people.
Yes,
and Christianity will no longer be a helpful tool for controlling the populace. That's my very, very cynical take on why Marxism and liberation theology are so de-Christianized everywhere.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Catholic Church, I mean, they definitely don't want something that, say, glorifies revolution, and democratization, anything like that. I don't think, and this is kind of where Gutierrez was saying, the whole point is not political power. The whole point is empowering people to be able to live their lives and to be able to flourish. People need a certain amount of freedom and access to resources, money, etc., to be able to live their lives and to be productive citizens and happy people. And that's consistent with the gospel. And that's that's the point he's trying to make. Now, the question is, do you delegitimize? Like, in other words, you say, oh, well, that's great, but the bridge we have to cross over to get to the other side of the river, oh, that's unacceptable. Well, it's like it's like the pacifist who says it'd be nice if I could stop that mugging or that rape that's in progress, but of course, then I'd have to use physical violence, and I just can't do that because that's unchristian to use use violence against people.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
and that's the same problem that Bonhoeffer came up against.
Yes, exactly.
When he was determining whether he would participate in a plot to assassinate Hitler, because Bonhoeffer starts off as a strict pacifist.
Yes. And this is what I find kind of interesting. You have this. Oh boy, this is okay. So, without painting things too broad a brush, but you can see the kind of difference between, say, a conservative mentality and a liberal mentality. Conservative mentality, okay, so European American people basically are pragmatic. You do what needs to be done. You don't worry about whether it sets up accords with your principles or not, and you just ignore your own hypocrisy in whatever you're preaching. Okay, so you got to play dirty. You've got to use force. You've got to use coercion or whatever you got to do. This is part of what's going on with the whole MAGA thing. Because I don't mean MAGA in general, but evangelical support of MAGA. Because here's a guy who personally embodies almost everything about him is antithetical to Christianity. Mm-hmm. And even what these people say that they believe. But for pragmatic reasons, okay, they're going to embrace this guy because he's promised them something. Okay. And they don't see how other people are so upset by the hypocrisy of saying this is what we believe. But of course, we need God put this person that's the opposite of that in charge. And so we're voting for him, or, send him to us. On the other hand, on the other side of the spectrum, you have liberals who they hold these great ideals. They don't want to be hypocritical. And because they refuse to be pragmatic. They want to kind of go down with the ship, in other words, hold to your principles. And so you have one group that pragmatism is all it's about, and the ideals are just a smokescreen. On the other hand, the people that live by their ideals, to the extent, though, that they give up all pragmatism, and then they just keep getting defeated and exploited over and over again. And this is where I at least will tip my hat to somebody like Gutierrez, who's trying to forge some sort of tension between these two, that there is a time, in other words, Jesus, let's say it this way, if we have the conservative Jesus, he acts every day like he did in the temple. He's just going around kicking over tables and busting heads and doing whatever he has to do to, get his point or across or do what he has to do. On the other hand, you have the liberal who just, Jesus is just wringing his hands, wishing it could be better, wish he could do something about it. And Gutierrez said, there is a happy medium. There has to be a sense of tension. It's not an easy thing to decide, when do you act pragmatically? If you don't feel the pull of the principles, okay, then you're doing something wrong. But on the other hand, if you don't feel the pull of pragmatism once in a while, you can hold on to your principles and go down in flames. And it's just like this election. I'd like to see Biden out of there and replaced with somebody else. But pragmatically, if Biden still is on the ballot, even if they wheel his corpse in on a gurney, I'll still vote for it over Trump, in hopes that the cabinet and everybody else will actually run the country.
Kind of like already are.
Well, yeah. I mean, and this isn't the first time. I mean, we've had especially like FDR, when he got confined to a wheelchair, and it really is more about the team of people you assemble. And I'll say this, even in spite of all of other Trump's narcissism and bad thinking, and the people that he put, here's the thing. All the decent people that he appointed all quit and didn't want to work with him anymore. Now, what does that tell you? And the ones that stuck around are the people that I would never want to see in cabinet positions. Okay. So, you have, anyway, that's another issue. But here we come back to.
Do you want Rudy Giuliani running a whole department of the executive branch?
No, at least he got disbarred. So,
that doesn't matter to Trump.
I think Rudy's also on the same path with dementia as Biden and Trump. I just think Biden's progressing faster than Trump. Although it's kind of hard to tell with Trump because he's so self-delusional. He's lied so many times that he thinks that everything he says is true.
He's an energetic, crazy person.
I mean, the guy's on trial, because of this hush money. And then he stands up at the debate and says, "Oh no, I never slept with a porn star." It's like, really? I mean, if you're going to lie, at least make them good lies. It's like,
well, have you been following all of the things that have come out of the Epstein papers being released?
I haven't followed it closely, but
it's pretty disgusting.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
It's beyond what I would want to talk about publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last episode, we discussed soaking, so it's pretty bad.
Yes. So anyway, liberation theology.
I think part of what you're getting at is the difference between liberals and the left.
Yes.
Which Gutierrez is definitely on the left, but I wouldn't call him a liberal.
Yeah, I would say he's a practical liberal. See, and that's the thing. If you're going to be a liberal, be a practical liberal. I mean, and this is what Reinhold Niebuhr was trying to do. That's why he called his version of Christianity Christian realism. In other words, yes, you've got to be guided by the ideals, but we don't live in an ideal world. So, like Kant's ethics, where you can't even lie to save somebody's life. Well,
right.
That, or Bonhoeffer. Oh, no. It's too bad Hitler's in power. I wish there was something we could do about it. Well, okay, desperate times call for desperate measures. But if you give up that tension, you have on one hand the hand wringers who don't want to do anything. So my hat's off to AOC for her at least filing the motion about impeaching the justices.
Impeach Alito and Thomas.
Yes. Uncle Thomas. Anyway, I'm sorry. So anyway, maybe that was mean, but anyway, but he brought it on himself. On the other hand, you have conservatives who use whatever excuse in the book under the guise of pragmatism and never actually live or try to uphold the ideals.
Well, and I just want to when you say liberal for someone on the left hears liberal in terms of neoliberal.
Yeah.
Which is a different meaning. It's a more globally accepted meaning than what we use in America for liberal.
Yeah.
Which is neoliberalism is very closely aligned with capitalism and the current status quo. So
yes,
Gutierrez is not a neoliberal. He's a leftist.
Yeah.
But for the American audience, it would be liberal.
Yes. Yeah. The context kind of shifts over time. And I'm saying, I'm judging, of course, by U.S. standards. Mm-hmm. In the way I'm using the jargon. I realize that most of us that would be classified as liberal here in the United States would be moderate or even mildly conservative in parts of Europe.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So whenever you see that, when they say the far right is taking, getting spots in European, it's not as far right as our far right here. So,
it can be in certain places. Yeah,
it can be, but I doubt that there's as many militia groups in European countries.
You got Mussolini's daughter in Italy. Oh. She's pretty far right.
She has to be pretty old, isn't she?
She's in her 50s.
Mussolini's daughter?
60s, maybe. She's got a political office in Italy. I don't remember what exactly, but she's got power, which is insane.
Well, he must have been pretty old when she was born.
She defends Mussolini. It might be his granddaughter.
Maybe that would make more sense. But yeah.
Anyway, I'm not Italian. I don't follow it that closely. But back to liberation theology.
Duce. Anyway, go ahead.
I want to get to Black liberation theology and James Cone.
Yes.
Briefly, because we need to wrap this up pretty quick. But,
yes.
One of the things that Black liberation theology gives us, and this is just for those who have never read James Cone, it's just liberation theology, but from the Black perspective in America. And it's more talking about racial inequality than economic inequality.
Right.
But I think one of its most poignant arguments is that what you see on the cross in Christianity is Jesus' identification with those who would later be lynched.
Right. Right.
And this is all in The Cross and the Lynching Tree.
Yes.
Which is a book everyone should read.
Yes. Yes.
So that is, I think, one of the strongest arguments for the preferential option for the poor and the oppressed and the outcast of society that I've heard is the tying it directly to the crucifixion as this is not just Jesus paying the debt for your sins. This is Jesus' identification with the oppressed.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I liked Cohn's writings. I think they're pretty substantive, and he's absolutely right. Basically, Jesus identifies more with the black people in society than he would identify more with the black people in society than the white people, because Jesus was on the receiving end of oppression. And
and then that's also the foundation for other types of liberation theology that have come to the fore more recently, like queer liberation and others. Right.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. It's very interesting, and maybe we can return back to some of those in at least black theology in another episode here. At some point, that might be worth exploring. But anyway, anything else you want to add here before we wrap this up?
I have my own critiques of liberation theology, even though I speak very highly of it, but I think they're beyond the scope of this episode.
Okay.
So maybe we'll get to some of my critiques of some of the more like nitty gritty, minute points that I am critical of.
I mean, if you want to do that, we could do that now.
It would take too long.
Okay.
But essentially my critiques, to give a little overview, my critiques are that Marxism as a full political tool is outdated and should be updated.
Yeah.
That they're about 100 years too late for Marxism.
Yes. Oh. Yeah, so could we have a neo-Marxism or something? That would be an interesting
and then
question.
We have to get into the social sciences, and I think Girard is the new path forward for liberation theology, but this is getting into very nitty-gritty niche.
Yes.
Niche territory here.
I get it. All right. Well, we'll call it quits then for this episode. We will liberate our listeners and let you go for the rest of your day. We hope you enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this. And if the world doesn't end, we'll be back with another episode. We hope you take care, and God bless.